My name is Stevenson. This is the place I'm building. We're going to live in it. It's called RabbitView, and we're at 2203 30th Avenue Southwest in Calgary. Okay, this build is unique because there's very little wood in it. This house is all concrete. It's a tricky lot. We've got 15 feet difference between the top of the lot and the alley. So we have steps in it. It's all concrete, as I said, so we have huge foundations. And it's a little different building material as well. We're using the insulated concrete forms for the actual wall construction. So yeah, it's a very unique product. We have, as I said, we've got the walkout basement. So I'm actually standing on a frost wall, which is the very south wall of the house. So we have to be 5.5 feet below the actual ground level so it doesn't freeze. And we have, so we actually have protection so the whole house isn't heaving up and down. Again, it's a heavy house, especially with the concrete walls. They're 8 inches thick, and we have literally tons of rebar in there because, well, the entire project has 18 tons of rebar in the walls and in the footings and in the retaining walls. The Logix product is super interesting because I like to use the Lego block analogy. You basically build the walls and you fill them up with concrete. You fill them up with rebar and then concrete, and you're done. You've got insulation, you've got vapor barrier, you've got structure, and soundproofing is amazing, and the R value is pretty good too. Again, we've got steps here that add quite a bit of complication to the actual wall structure, and then we have, we're in a deep hole, so we've got 12 foot walls that we have to deal with as well. So that's why we're getting the retaining walls up as soon as we can. Footings are, it's like anything else. It's the basics of everything in a house. Super important. The house sits on it. It's sort of like your feet and when you're standing. These footings are huge. They're 5 feet wide. Typically a house has 2 foot wide footings. They're 10 inches deep. Tons and tons of rebar, as I've said. And this is basically your house is sitting on this, so the wider your footings, the more stable your house is going to be. For a good example is if you're walking on the snow and if you're in regular shoes, you're just going to fall right into the snow. If you have snowshoes on, you've got this huge surface area, so you can walk on that snow. So essentially the house is floating on these footings. So if you have a little narrow footing, the chances of your house slipping or creaking or sinking altogether is greater than if you have a larger footing. And these footings have, again, I keep on talking about these drops, and so you have to be very careful with the drops because you've got stress points, and there's lots of chances of cracking there. So we have to pay particular detail to the drops. Building the ICF, or the insulated concrete walls, is probably the simplest part of the entire project. You basically start out with the footings here, and you start laying out your Lego blocks. Ultimately, you want to design the house for the blocks as opposed to the other way around, because it's just easier in the end. So you lay out your blocks. They all interconnect, and just like Lego, they all snap together. You start with your first course of the ICF product. You lay it down. It's imperative that the foundation is flat. That keeps the house plumb as you're going up the stories. You put the first course in, you lay your rebar in it, you put the second course in, everything is staggered just like bricklaying. And then once you get up to, well, in this case it'll be 10'4", you start putting the concrete in. You want to be very careful. The concrete company comes along and they've got the big pumper truck with the big boom, and there's a couple of guys and they reduce the hose size of the boom down to 3 inches so that they can actually get it in, and you want to make sure that the concrete goes right to the very bottom of the form, and then you start filling it up in 4-foot lifts, as they call it. So you do 4 feet at a time, and then you just keep on going around the entire building, and you let that set up for a little bit, and then you put another 4 feet in, and then another 4 feet in until you get to your top level. And then you insert a vibrator to make sure the concrete is consolidated. You don't want any voids or, as they call it, honeycombing in the end. So you want to make sure that everything is filled up imperatively with this concrete, because that's the trick. If you have any holes, then you lose strength. Retaining walls are they add a lot of cost to a project, and the more difficult the terrain, the more retaining walls you have. Retaining walls are super important because they're holding up dirt, and there's all sorts of loads. There's huge loads on a retaining wall, including hydraulic. So in this project, as you can see behind me, we've got this grid work of rebar, and that's essentially to keep strength, or to help combine strength with the concrete, because there's all sorts of different loads, but the rebar really increases the tensile strength, so the pulling apart strength. Concrete is it'll take a lot of compressive loads, so you can press it and it's not going to do anything. It'll take huge loads, but if you pull it apart, it'll pop apart relatively easily. So that's what the rebar is doing. As you can see, we've got over a 10-foot wall. So you can imagine the forces of the dirt pushing against the wall this way. It wants to do this, so we have to have a very large footing for the wall itself. And so the larger the footing, the better design of the retaining wall, the better off you're going to be, and the longer that retaining wall is going to last. I hate to say it, but all retaining walls will fail eventually. Not so much the wall itself, but eventually everything starts to move with the general movement of the earth, shall we say. Concrete and retaining walls, it drives me insane because the consumer never sees this in a house. It's often overlooked, and I think it's one of the most important things about a structure is just how well it's laid out. Again, the concrete, it's not going to rot. It has a life of hundreds and hundreds of years, particularly if it's done right. So if you don't know how the concrete was put in, I think there's a little bit of a risk there. Most contractors are pretty good, but again, that's because we're building our own house here. I think we're very fortunate that we can actually build it ourselves and make sure that everything is going to last. Beauty of this project is we're building it ourselves, and we can do an absolutely fantastic job with the concrete and the rebar, and we know we're not cutting any corners. This house could be the last house standing in Calgary for all I know. So it's just a beautiful thing that we can actually pay attention to this detail, and we know that it's a fine product.